Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to be going over the results of the Latin American International Championships, the first IC of the season, and the final tournament in the Stellar Crown format. Some incredible games on display and some very worthy winners. Let's start off by looking at the day one analysis. There was over 1,800 players in the tournament, and the 6 most popular decks in the room were Regidrago at 15%. Then we have Lugia Archeops at 10%, the only 2 archetypes to get above that 10% threshold, followed by Terapagos Dustamar, which I think is actually the peak of its popularity in the Stellar Crown format at the last tournament of the season. Regidrago V-Star, despite having so many great results, still is below 9%, which I still can't get my head around. Charizard Pidgeot was at 8.5%, and Palkia Dustoir was also picked up by a number of players at over 6% representation in day one. Moving on to day 2 then, Terapagos continued to climb. It always seems to have good day 1 to 2 conversion this entire time in the format. Maybe it's indication that we should have been playing it more this entire time. Regidrago V-Star still doing well as well. I think we know at this point that even though it's quite low representation in day 1, it has really high, very good player representation, which always means it's going to lead to a good day 1 to 2 conversion. Regidrago falling down a little bit, as was Lugia, but not too much. Charizard kind of staying where it was, and Palkia dipping off the graphic with Gardevoir coming in at around that 6.9% as well. Let's get into the top cut stuff then, and there were 11 players who made the asymmetrical top cuts. We had 4 players who were on 10-1-1 records after Swish, so Ilya, Jackson, Daniel, and Brent didn't have to play in the asymmetrical cut, and Rose Gregson was the highest placing 10-2. So also avoided the extra round. Miroslav, our eventual winner, was able to overcome a Charizard EX in the asymmetrical cut. Austin faced off against Leonardo, which is a pretty good matchup, so no surprise to see him vanquish there. And Raz and Julius had to play a mirror match, with Raz coming out on top, which means 5 of our top 11 pilots were all on Regidrago. So sit back, relax, and have a look at some deck lists. We start off with Miroslav's winning list, which is the same list that Daniel took to top 4 in Gdansk, and once again took to top 4 for this tournament, so lots of great results around this exact 60, where the deck goes all in on Regidrago V-Star, doesn't play the Radiant Charizard, instead has a couple additional dragons in the list, with Hisuian Gudra and Haxorus. It also forgoes Fezandipity EX and goes for the Quad Ogerpon EX instead, just as the optimal lead in the deck. Also it goes against the Super Odd mentality and has 1 Night Stretcher and double Superior Energy Retrieval to give you more discard fodder for your dragon attackers, but also can be a great reload for your energy cards, and Teal Dance eventually does end up drawing you a bunch of cards in the late game as well, when you are filtering through your deck. So that's the list that Daniel Magda also played to top 4. Insane to get back-to-back top 4 finishes in the Masters Division. Daniel is a very, very strong player who's recently aged up, so I'm really excited to see where they can go with this game. Brent Tonneson got 2nd place. He's a very, very decorated player and has been piloting this archetype for a decent amount of time. You can see just how many accomplishments this exact 60 has got over the last few tournaments. This has been a list that was cooked up early on in the season, and many strong players have been continuing to pilot the exact same 60 with no changes. Brent is probably one of the strongest players in the game to currently not have an IC victory under his belt, but I'm pretty sure that's just going to be a matter of time. Amazing results once again there from Brent. Ilya got a top 4 performance with Gholdengo EX. Interesting to see that it's not really taking that yellow approach where it doesn't play per barrel, instead just has the Finn Palkia line and the one-offs of the basics. Seems like Spiritomb was a really good call for the weekend. Shutting off Rotom V from a number of the setup archetypes and shutting down Luminion from Lugia. I think one of the bigger innovations of the deck is going away from Irida altogether and instead having a couple copies of Morty's Conviction in the 60. Of course, there are a huge number of decks that go wide in the format right now, so giving yourself an extra push into the deck does seem reasonable. I also definitely like seeing the Churro scenario in the deck as well. I think against a lot of Regidrago players and dragapult players, the opponent is going to try and set up a 4-prize turn against you by sprinkling 1 Dengo whilst hitting the active for 200. A Churro scenario completely gets around that play and gets you right back in the driver's seat, so I feel like that's actually a really big card in the list. Jackson Ford definitely went against the grain with Charizard. Yes, it's the really standard Pokemon lineup, but you may notice that A-Spec, which has been contentious in Charizard for a while, is now Secret Box of all things. It looks like Jackson's gone quite cheeky on the Arven count, just having 2 copies in the list, but that Secret Box does act as like a 3rd copy in a lot of situations. He's also playing 3 different stadium cards, with that Secret Box possibly trying to stitch it together to help you get these when you need them. It's also interesting to me that both Charizard and Gardevoir have now seen success with the Secret Box as the A-Spec of choice. Rose Gregson got her top 8 performance and puts another notch on the Chow Guardi performance list. So again, not too much standout here. She's just taken a good 60 and piloted it really well to a strong finish. Austin Ellis was able to get a top 8 placement with Terapagos Dustoir. It has gone back to the 2-2 Dustoir 1-1 Pidgeot line, as opposed to Tor's most recent build, and is going thick with the quad Noctowl. Interesting to see the Energy Lotto in the deck list. I know some players may be put off from having a Colress in their 60, but I'd personally prefer to just have either thicker Pidgeot or have Hisuian in the deck list rather than have Lotto, to still brute force my way into Pidgeot, which then finds my double turbos guaranteed. It never feels great having to dual seek for the Lotto and just sort of praying for the best. The other interesting note here is that we were of course a Bouffalant-less list here, instead just having the Manaphy in the deck to protect yourself against some spread attacks. As we know, Raz is a ridiculous Regidrago player. He got top 4 at the World Championships and comes back to another international tournament and now gets a top 8. The list doesn't really differ too much from his World 60 actually. I think it going towards some super odds but still having one superior in the deck. Incorporating Jamming Tower now to respect the Bravery Charm. And cutting Goodra to add Radiant Charizard. All like fairly commonplace cards in the deck anyway. But just great to see Raz playing on the top of his game with this archetype again. Ulyss Brumfeld, very strong player from Europe, very consistent pilot as well. Bringing Alberto's winning Gdansk 60 to the tournament and getting a really nice top 9 finish. Raphael definitely had a very creative build of Charizard here, where we're shoehorning in 2 Terapagos as well as Fanrotom and Noctowl here, giving you access to early Jewel Seeker, which can then hand map your way towards Charizard and Pidgeot EX. Very interesting to see the Jacques supporter in here as well as a really critical supporter card that you can pick with your Jewel Seeker to help you get multiple stage 2s online. Something I've actually seen in regular Terapagos Dustoirs as well to decent success, so it's cool to see that idea was yoinked in this Charizard approach. It's actually really interesting that this deck can play like a few different modes, to be honest with you. You're clearly trying to use Terapagos early on in the game, just when you get that Area 0 out, you go wide on the board, and then you're trying to utilize Charizard with Briar rather than Terapagos, because you just have that much higher damage cap, but also you have the Radiant Charizard when you need to play one Prizey as well. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. Definitely going to be a headache to play around with this one. But again, when you have Jewel Seeker, when you have Pidgeots, when you have Pheasantipity, you can make all sorts of combinations come together. And I really like the idea of using Terapagos because it's kind of like a good enough card in the opening stages of the game, and then just saying that Charizard is just a late game beat stick. And then the final deck in the asymmetrical cut was Iron Thorns. Not too much to write home about here, to be honest with you. At this point, we've seen Iron Thorns all over the place, and this is just no exception. No real changes to the main 60s. As for other tails in the tournament, there was a Clorf that made top 16, piloted by Damien here. It's stuff that we've seen before. We've got the super effectives, so we can get KOs in with Electrode onto Charizard. Has a really good number of switching cards with the triple cart, the double jet as well, so you should have easy ways around some of the controlling matchups. Even has the Bravery Charm in the 60, which I think is pretty interesting to try and offset some damage counter placement that's going on. Mochi is really busted with Ursaluna. There's a lot of elements to this deck that actually is quite good. Also, I'm really interested in this archetype with the new Precious Trolley coming out. I think that's just another card that can help push this deck up the tier list. Also in top 16, we had a Turbo Roaring Moon. This deck always seems to be underplayed, but we still see spikes here and there from this deck. Seems to just be a very consistent beat stick, has Judge at its disposal, has one-hit KOs, has powerful item gust. There's still a lot to like about this deck, to be honest with you. Fabrizio, off his most recent special event top 4 with Lost Box, actually adapted the decklist again. This time actually seeing Iron Valiant EX as an attacking option in the deck. And of course just being another means of using Tachyon bits to set Pokemon up for KOs. Definitely a pretty cool idea here, but still within that turbo shell. You're not sacrificing too much just to play this card. There are a couple of players who got top 32 with an Ogerpon Mimikyu attacking style deck. This is Christian Fontenot's list, as well as Alex Szymanski, who also got top 32. There's the very cheeky Sparkling Crystal in the list, which can combine with both of your Ogerpon actually. Means you have the option to use that Torrential Pump attack with DTE plus Crystal. It does work even though it says Shuffle 3 energy. This does work with the Crystal. And it actually means that you can get an Ogerpon out of nowhere as well, which is kind of surprising. As we know though, the core of the archetype is going to be that you have Quad Mist on these annoying abilities. You can Lost City away the attackers that can deal with your stuff, and leave your opponent with Pokemon that can't deal with your stuff. It's also pretty interesting that there's the Chorus Experiment, so you can get attacks in with Cram for additional pressure pokes when you just need to get through certain attackers as well. Just quickly noticing that Patusi also played the Noctowl Terapagos Wombo combo deck, where you're mashing the archetype with Charizard as well, so it seems like a number of Brazilians took this to the tournament. They've been innovators of Charizard from the start, so always cool to keep that in mind. Gouging Fire's done it again, taking Luke's Gdansk top 32 list. This time it's Jose, with also a top 32 finish, cool to see. Nathan Beck was the only top 32 Raging Bolt player, pretty standard 60 overall. And the only top 32 Lugia was in the hands of Edda. Felipe was piloting the only Dragapult that made top 32 as well. It's a Dustoir no Pidgeot build for those interested. Just outside of top 64, there was a Miraidon, and I'm interested in Miraidon specifically because of how many upgrades this deck gets in Surging Sparks, where we get to replace Mewtwo and get a Pikachu inserted into the 60. Honestly, I would just take this as the starting base and just add in a Pikachu and see how that functions. The Thunderous is certainly not a card that I just had to read again, but this seems like a pretty powerful single prize inclusion that can protect your bench Pokemon as well. Also, the Rotom V choice of the deck list might indicate that you actually choose to go first with Miraidon these days, just end on that high hand advantage and just give yourself that extra turn attachment. I honestly don't think it's a terrible option, to be fair. Just based on how many other archetypes want to go first anyway, denying that and ending on a big Rotom draw seems pretty cool to me. So overall, I think those are the main interesting things to take away here. We have to completely go back to the drawing board on Charizard. Is this the new way? I think we definitely have to be playing Regidrago more and respecting it more because it seems to just be running away with tournaments despite being sub 10% play rate every event. And with another flop performance from Lugia and Bolt, is our trust misplaced in these aggressive archetypes? I'll hear your thoughts down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.